Well, I'm doing a motor and reproducer test on a green late 101. This would be about 1930-31, the auto stop feature. And this is not my machine. I was asked to service it, and that's now completed. This was purchased as a restored machine. Now, restoration can mean a lot of things. To me, restoration means you stripped it down to bare wood, replaced everything, and everything's like new. That is not something you want to see with antiques. What they did here was wipe the case down with a damp cloth, add a little silver paint to a rusty lid clasp there, and pretty much, yes, they smeared some white grease on the motor and called it good. That is not restoring a machine. Okay, that's not servicing one either. Servicing one means you took the motor out, you took it apart, you cleaned everything and put it back together, made sure the speed was properly regulated and that regulation shows on the speed control right there at 78. You don't want to be spinning at 78 and it shows low speed or whatever. And rebuilding the reproducer. That's servicing a machine. So you always have to be very careful on eBay when you purchase machines that are said to be not serviced but restored or anything like that. I don't even like that word, restored, because that implies sandpaper and polyurethane and other things I don't really care for. Now, this is a really nice machine. The exceptionally nice cover on it. It's well preserved. It had some issues because this is the later model 101. It does have the Potmetal reproducer. You've heard me speak of these before. They were fine back in the day. 1933, they were fine. They were great. They were light. They were easy on the records, easier than the heavy brass, and perfectly good. They would work just as fine. But the problem is that we're pushing 70, 80, 90, 100 years later, and they're starting to swell and crack. Intergranular corrosion, because there is lead in the mix of pot metal, and it is corroding inside the metal, causing swelling and cracking, which often destroys the reproducer, and just you can't even rebuild them most of the time. It's just they're gone. This case, we got lucky. Yes, we do have swelling and cracking. You can I don't know if it'll show up there, but you see it around the ring here. It's starting to swell and crack. It had swollen so much that the needle bar was out of adjustment here. We had to open everything up and readjust it properly. It cracked on top right there because the back is also pot metal and it's also swelling. But in this case, instead of locking the two halves of the reproducer together, it actually loosened it a little bit, so I was able to get it apart. And once apart, we added a new diaphragm, and I had to use some of my custom gaskets because it's a little swollen and it needed to take up some more airspace. Adjusted the needle bar, made sure that it was properly aligned, replaced the isolator gasket with a newer style, and glued it in place. I use white glue, not crazy glue or anything like that. It just good old Elmer's works very good for this, and if you don't try to twist the reproducer off, it will stay on there for a long time. And that has brought this one back to life. So there is no need to source an all brass one from eBay, UK eBay, or something else to put on there to take its place. Although the owner of this machine does have a very nice all brass Victor reproducer. But he can save that for another machine now. But this one is working very nicely. And what else did we have to do? Well, let's see. The governor bearings. I can't stress this enough. I know it's a real pain. Those governor bearings have tiny ball bearings inside the cups, and they will really fight you when they get glued in there. You'll have to work. It takes hours. Picking and solvents and everything else, but you have to get those bearings loose. If you don't, they'll remain stuck in there, and it's going to affect your speed. You know, it's not good. It's not good for the machine. You got to take the time to pick those bearings out of there, lube them up properly, put them back, readjust them. And again, I see people avoiding this. But you got to do it. And you also absolutely must remove the spring from the spring barrel and clean it. In this case, the spring was replaced at some point in the machine's past. Not recently, by the look of it. The grease used was far too heavy. It was a very, very thick grease, which was probably what was available at the time, but That's not good to use. These motors don't have a lot of extra strength in them. They're made for portables, which is what they're being used in. They don't have huge springs like you'd find in a Victrola the Ninth or something like that. You have to use a smooth, creamy, light white grease is what I use, light grease in there. And I cut that even further with a little bit of lube, STP lube, just to thin it out. That allows the spring to move unimpeded. It's 48 degrees in here, and it'll now play a record. It'll actually play almost two sides of a record, which is really all you can ask from a used old spring. Even the new springs really don't give you a whole lot more than that with these machines. But that's fine. You know, they're not hard to crank up, and they don't, unlike other machines, you don't have to crank it 100 times. About 25, 30 cranks and spins of the winding handle, and you're done. Excuse me. The other one was the auto stop. Oh boy. The auto stops on these machines are temperamental. You know, they're a first generation auto stop for HMV. They would go on to change them yet again for the 102, and then yet again when they acquired the rights to use the Columbia model of auto stop. They don't, this one is badly worn, shaking all over the place, probably missing some paper washers in there. But notice this. The tip somehow is missing on this. I guess that they must have bent it and tried to re-straighten it, and they snapped the tip off. I've never seen that happen on this, but they did, and it was not properly, you know, actuating on the bar there. So we had to go to the parts bin and replace the entire auto stop with one that actually works and is not broken. That too is part of servicing a machine. Fix the broken parts, you know, or at least try. Don't leave them there, because this machine does not have a brake on it other than that auto stop. So if the auto stop's not working, you're going to spend the rest of your life cranking it and holding it with one thumb so it doesn't spin out for you. Later on, well, obviously the earlier machines do have a brake, and you could put one on one of these if you wanted to drill some holes. And eventually the 102 went to using both brake and auto stop. The reason for this being some customers were going to play the older records, like this Harry Lauder record here. Notice it does not have the eccentric groove here to trigger the auto stop. This is an older record. This is from the teens sometime. I don't know exactly when, but my guess be about 1915, 16, 17, right in there somewhere. Before auto stop was even a feature. So they knew customers would play these records, so they gave them the option on the 102, there's a switch, will be right here, to turn the auto stop off and just use the regular manual brake and just shut the record off manually when it was done. And if you wanted to go back to a late 20s record, a Victor Electric or whatever, that had the eccentric, just turn it back on, you're done. You don't have that option with this machine. What you do here, this is how it works. Now we're playing Harry Lauder in the rotary by request of the machine's owner, who wanted to hear a Harry Lauder record on there. I will demonstrate the auto stop on the next record. If you over travel this, notice the bar there, you will disengage it. So you don't want to do that. You come to this point, you'll feel resistance. Go a little, if you gotta give it a little push, you'll hear that, and the record starts to spin. Let's hear it.
Every week in the year, a very fine bunch of good fellows appear. They are the livest of wires you could find. Always ahead, they are never behind. In the rotary, that's the place to find sociability. No worry or care, from business right away. Having a smoke, cracking a joke with your pals in the rotary. The rotary, in the rotary. That's the place to find sociability. With your pals in the rotary. every week in the year. Everyone sure of an hour of good cheer. Now an hour of good cheer is a tonic, we're told. An hour of good cheer is worth barrels of gold. In the Rotary, in the Rotary, that's the place to find sociability. No worry or care, from business right away. Having a smoke, cracking a joke with your pals in the Rotary, in the Rotary, in the Rotary. That's the place to find sociability. No worry or care, from business right away. Having a smoke, cracking a joke with your pals in the Rotary.
And that's how you stop it when there's no eccentric groove on the record. Or you can do this. Let's let it spin up again. Shake it a little bit, the tone arm, and it'll stop. Let's get that needle out of there, because now we're going to play a later 20s record, a mid-20s record that has the eccentric, just to demonstrate the auto stop. What do we have? I have a number of records up here. Need the one that's got the auto stop. Here we go. I mean, it's got the eccentric groove. Mona Vanna. Oh, Paul Whitman. He was one of the most prolific band leaders of the 1920s, most popular, had a lot of records out. Right now I'm actually testing records, and I must have 50 different records of his on here. This one I'm guessing is mid-20s, just because of the look of the eccentric is a little different than you'll see in the later ones, and it's not a Victor Electric yet. We need a needle. Let's see. Always change the needle for each play of the record. I say that every time. I say that for a reason, because needles are cheap. You can get them on eBay by the hundreds, by the thousands. They're not expensive. But once a record's worn out, it's done. That's it. It's gone forever. Alrighty, let's wind it up. I always wind these things up for each play of the record, because I know these springs, or especially the older ones, simply don't often have the power to power through two sides of a record, not one this long anyway. And because it's cold in here, even the thin grease is going to be a little bit thick. But it's not affecting it for one play. Okay, here we go. Auto stop demonstration. Go until you feel resistance. Then a little bit further. Don't go too far. If you over travel, the arm will come off. Again, this is a primitive design. They did better later on. And there you see the auto brake functioning as it's supposed to function, which is fairly rare in my experience. On other machines, I far prefer the 101 with the regular brake on it. When I play records, I'm generally close to the machine anyway. I can always reach over and just flick the brake on. But when the auto brake works, it does work once you've done it right, and this is now operating as it should. And that's pretty much it. You know, we've done the basics there. Didn't need much on the, obviously the case is in good shape. Didn't need any special cleaning or anything like that. Just needed the usual motor service. And if anybody wants to know what a motor service entails, I think I mentioned this before. It's removing the motor from the machine and off the motorboard, cleaning off all the old nasty grease from things like the governor bearing cups and the little ball bearings in there, all the gears. These do not use fiber gears, not this machine, so you don't have to worry about that. But you want to get all that nasty crap off of there that's basically turned rock hard, and it's holding back performance. And especially important to pull the spring out, clean it, put it back with fresh lubricant so that whatever power it has will be available to you when you play a record. Because nothing robs power quicker than a dirty, crappy spring that's loaded with really hard grease. That is not going to aid performance. And of course, you also need to rebuild the reproducer or have it done. You know, because that will not only harm your records playing with rock hard gaskets in there. I don't care what you've heard anywhere else. There's a reason why natural rubber was used in these, and the replacement materials are also very pliable. It's so that needle bar that you see right there has freedom of movement for the needle in the groove. That it's moving like this, not quite that much, but it is back and forth movement like that. It needs to have the freedom to do that. And the reproducer needs to have the freedom to move a little bit. Otherwise, that needle turns into a cutting tool in the grooves, and it starts to harm your records. Time and again, I see people selling machines as plays great, and it has an original reproducer on it. I've even seen people putting things, they're trying to seal up the air leaks, and of course that also robs sound, is air leaks from rock hard gaskets. They put tape and all kinds of goo or whatever over them to seal the air leaks up and try to increase volume. You're destroying the records. Take the reproducer apart, replace the gaskets. Now, there are brand new gaskets available for all of the Victor reproducers, the Exhibition, the number 2, the number 4. From all of the phonograph part sellers or the phonograph shows, you can get them. There are gaskets for Columbias and various other ones that also use an Exhibition-style tube gasket. There's really no excuse for not rebuilding a reproducer because the parts are available. You can get new diaphragms. They run about $12 for a diaphragm. The back isolated gaskets, about $11, $12 also. They're a little expensive, but then they have to be made. You know, somebody had to tool up to make those. Gaskets run about $3, $3, $4 around in there. These ones are custom gaskets. They were cut for me by a friend of mine out of special material, and I use them for reproducers like these that are a little warped and might have a bit of an air leak. They take up more volume in there, and they seal better. So I use them for these applications, and they work beautifully. You know, there's no excuse not to get a reproducer redone. Either do it yourself or have someone do it for you. And that way you'll be preserving your records, you get a better sound. I mean, why even bother winding one of these things up and playing them if the record is going to sound horrible? It's pointless. Then you might as well just have a display piece. But if you want to actually play a record and get the most that you can out of it, some of these records do have wear on them. They're not going to be 100%. But to get whatever you can get out of them, you need to have the machine in proper working order. And part of that is rebuilding the reproducer as best you can. Now, I didn't know if I'd be able to rebuild this reproducer. I had to give it a try. You know, you take it apart, you see what you have to work with, and you go from there. There's a lot of times these Potmetal reproducers are just so far gone, especially on Victor machines. I don't know why. It must have been a bit cheaper Potmetal mix of metal, but I've seen them just fragmenting, and they're just impossible to rebuild. Well, a lot of HMVs are generally not too bad. I mean, if you can't get them apart, you can forget, because sometimes the outer ring here will be brass while the back will be pot metal. For a while, they did it that way. And when that happens, you cannot get that, when the back swells, you cannot get that out of the front brass ring. It just locks in there. You're going to end up chipping it out and just totally destroying the back. But when both parts are pot metal, they both swell up and they tend not to lock up as badly. You know, this one, because this is probably a I didn't look up the number, but probably is a 1931 produced machine, you're going to have the whole reproducer is pot metal and you can't get it apart. Now, I've seen some Electroller number 4 reproducers, the German Electroller reproducers. They must have used a particularly horrible mix because I've never had success salvaging one of those. They are so badly swollen and cracked, they are beyond use. Some of them not even good enough for display, they're just coming apart. But in this case, we got it. It's done. That will be playing for many more years before it starts to swell and crack even worse, and that's the end of it. But for now, it's playing well. And there you go. The Green 101 motor and reproducer test. Both are now functioning as they should.